Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Um, Today's session and this topic is going to be a bit of a touchy subject, so I would ask that everyone keep an open mind in regards to what I have to say about certain issues in regards to residential schools and how it affects our culture as Native First Nation people in throughout our continent and other parts of the world as well. Um, when we recover from alcoholism, we got to remember that alcoholism was introduced to us at a later time in our culture. We had ceremonies. We had ways of doing things. We had our own laws. We respected nature. We lived with nature in a way that it was unity. We kept the circle going. What I mean by that is we fed each other, and we that's when we pray. We're keeping that circle strong, and we feed that food chain, the animals, the birds, the fish. We have to keep feeding each other, and the fish and the birds and some of the animals will feed us, right? So when that all that we get, when all that goes away, the less we have to keep that food chain going and to keep that circle of life going, which we are a part of, no doubt. Residential schools were designed to take the Indian out of the Indian, take the savage out of the Indians. We were accidentally named by Indians, supposedly, I guess, when Christopher Columbus discovered North America, discovered America, or whatever he discovered, he discovered. So he thought he found India, but in fact, we were always here. This was, we're a First Nation, and we were always in North America. We didn't come across no continent. We're not part Chinese or Asian or anything like that. We were always here. We were the ones that discovered North America, Canada, and same with other First Nation cultures. But I also want to clear up that I don't want to get into an argument with anybody over anything. I'm just here as a facilitator to educate people on reality. And some of you like to use the word, the term, the elephant in the room, which means the obvious. Some people like to ignore the elephant in the room, ignore the obvious. And residential schools is one of the biggest, let's try and sweep it underneath the carpet and ignore it topic. And with First Nations people, we're at a time in our lives that we worship different cultures. We worship in different ways. We pray with the church. We pray with maybe our spouses has whatever the religion may. I don't want to go into too much into that, but we all have our different ways of praying, and many of us still follow the church. Many of us First Nation people still follow the church, which is fine. Okay, we're up to date now, and there's nothing we can do about whose faith and who whether our spouse worships that or our brothers and sisters or our kids worship whatever. We have different faiths, and when we sober up and we are getting away from alcohol and getting away from our addictions, we need that higher power, and we need a faith. It's important. And so what I'm my topic today, what I wanted to go in more on was the residential schools that were designed to take the native out of First Nation people, the Indian out of the Indian, and make us tame and again. So the churches started there. with the residential schools. The churches were brought to our communities by the missionaries, by the church, by the founding fathers of these religions, I guess you would say, and introduced to our people. So this is what needed to be implemented throughout our territories, throughout our other First Nations communities in other parts of the world. This was what needed to happen. We need to be colonized. They had to colonize us forcefully because we wouldn't have volunteered for this. Okay? And this is the religion that many of us choose to follow today, is the church. And a lot of our First Nations people. And this is what I'm merely only educating you on this. So don't bite my head off. If you got negativity towards me, or you want to be negative at me in comments or whatever, I probably won't respond. Okay? There's no need to. I'm not going to argue over the internet, but I'm just have my beliefs, and I'm just sharing them with you. That's all I'm doing. Okay? Keep an open mind. That's all I want you to do. And I'm not here to stir anything up, or it's not my job to piss anybody else off. That is definitely not my job. My job is just to be teach what I know, teach what I've learned over the years. So residential schools were in fact rape schools. They taught the wrong kind of love. Okay, they taught the wrong kind of love to First Nation people. And so after we've taken over all the land from the Native people, after all the Native people and all the First Nations people mostly are all killed off by diseases, by murder, by gunning them down, whatever. The population dwindled. So what was left was rounded up and put on reserves in these small communities, these First Nation communities that we have today. And that's the true reality. Okay, we didn't volunteer this. None of our people volunteered. Many of our people did not volunteer to go into the army and fight in World War I or World War II. A lot of them were drafted and forced into these wars, and my grandfather was one of them. But in residential schools, they already knew who they were going to send to the army and to the war. They were already practicing calisthenics with them, drills, doing tests on them, you name it. First Nations kids were taken from these communities. They had to be all rounded up, everyone's that could be found. There was no goodbyes, there's no hugs, no kisses, no nothing like that. If most of the times these kids were abducted, stolen right off the road, walking down the road, stolen right out of their homes by force with RCMP police. Okay, and then brought to these schools miles and miles and miles away from their communities. Some of these communities are bush communities, where you can only get to them on an airplane. So excuse me. What I want to stress to you is skills are handed down no matter what. When you're teaching children are vulnerable up to the age of 7 with learning skills. So when you're teaching skills, they can be positive teaching skills or they can be negative teaching skills. So you want to teach your children positive things, positive cultural things, positive family values, positive relationships, positive relationship values. All those were taken away, and we're just getting them back. Okay, we're just getting all those things, all these things back now. And so our ceremonies were outlawed. Our cultures were outlawed. It became wrong to speak Anishinaabemon, to speak our language. It became wrong to even speak one word in Anishinaabemon or any of our First Nation languages. But it wasn't wrong to abuse sexually. It wasn't wrong to physically abuse the children mentally. It wasn't wrong to beat them, beat the hell out of them, rape them. Your church staff in the residential schools, your staff in the residential school, all the different staff abused these children. All these Native children that were taken away from their communities, kidnapped and rounded up and brought into these residential schools. They were put there to learn an education. And an education they did learn. They began to learn the cycles of violence. They began to learn the cycles of sexual abuse, physical abuse, jealousy, all the different things that weren't in our culture before. So this is where we started to become unsavaged and uncivilized, so to speak. Whose fault is it? Is it mine? Is it your fault? No one likes to take the blame. In fact, a lot of us like to try to ignore that elephant in the room, the obvious, which is that many of our people were murdered in the name of the church. These churches that were brought here. Longhouses were burnt down with people during ceremony to put a church there. Communities were burned up to put churches there. Today, I can honestly say that I would never follow Jesus or follow the Bible. That's my belief. I found my culture. I found my wisdom and my beliefs to go on, to stay sober, to stay happy in this way of life. And it doesn't involve any of those abusive cycles. So that's why I share a lot of this with you today, and why I need to bring this out. These matters that are not talked about. There'll be more topics that I will cover involving the residential school. So in the residential schools, they taught these wrong skills, the wrong way of loving. Wrong way of loving. We learned there in these residential schools how to yell at each other, put each other down, call each other names, hurt each other's feelings, because that's love, right? We learn to sexually abuse each other in these schools. We learn to rip each other's emotions apart. Prey on one another. Treat each other like shit. Beat each other up. Steal from each other. Lie to each other. Okay? This is what we learned. We became uncivilized, or we became civilized. Okay, when we're in these residential schools. This is what they taught us. Supposedly now we're civilized and we're not savages. But this was all necessary. A lot of you people that are not native say, well, okay, war is war. This was necessary. It had to happen. Okay, get over it. I could say the same thing. What about me? What about my criminal career? Everything about that I've ever done in my life that was wrong. Why can't you just get over it? Why can't you, the government officials, get over it? Okay, it's not that possible. It's not that easy. So, why should I get over it? Why should I get over why I am the way I am today? But I can share them with you. I don't have to dwell on these things. I don't have to dwell on anything that ever happened to me. I don't have to blame anyone. A lot of my abusers came from these places. But there are also Zsagnash abusers too, white abusers, and physical abusers, sexual abusers, whatever you want. Like I said, when I grew up, I had a lot of drunks coming in and out of my house, all hours of the day and night. So there were white men and native men, and there were a lot of men of all different ages. And they all looked at me the same way that those church staff probably looked at kids. Lust, sexuality. This is what we learned in our relationships. Sex on demand. Whether your partner likes it or not. Jealousy. Physical abuse. The church staff, when some of the young girls got pregnant, a lot of the staff wanted to hide the fact. So we'll get rid of the evidence. And as soon as the fetus, as soon as the baby is born, the baby was taken out and thrown directly into a furnace. Some were stuffed into the walls of the residential school. And these were the pregnancies that came from the sexual abuse that were inflicted by the older staff, by the staff, by the different staff in the residential schools. And lots of physical abuse also. There were boys brought up in the middle of the night, locked into, well, not locked, I'm not sure if I got that right, but they were forced to put on a show for the staff, and they would get the boys, especially brothers, to beat each other up, so that they beat each other up to the point where they were crying. This was to entertain the staff. You have church staff sexually abusing the children at night, creeping around, walking around, feeling them up. These behaviors came into the communities. Those were not ours. We have secrets in our communities. We have secrets that we had to live with. We have secrets that we carried. So yes, in order to recover, we must begin to deal with a lot of our garbage. We don't always have to charge somebody or prosecute somebody, but we still have to deal with it. And we do that by finding someone that we trust to talk to and to deal with it that way. Because like I said, we had our own laws. We had our own beliefs in the way we did things. And locking people up wasn't one of them. They taught the wrong kind of love. They taught us jealousy, they taught us sexual abuse, and they tamed us. They made us civilized. Civilized. Okay? So we're pretty addictive today. Many of us are addictive and abusive. And we wonder why. And if church is your belief, then that's your belief. But I want you to know where this came from, where those churches came from. Every time you praise the Lord, every time every time you worship Jesus, the Chijagnash, Jesus Chijagnash, the great white man, every time you worship that, you're succumbing to it. Okay. This is that wasn't ours. That was not ours to begin with. That was a foreign. It was a foreign culture. Churches were foreign. Churches were not First Nation. Ceremonies like the Longhouse were First Nation. These were our ceremonies. Sun dances, sweat lodges, all these cultures that were taken away from us. We're just learning these things again now. We're just learning them. We're just starting, and if we know anything to do with our culture, we must keep sharing that. Okay, keep teaching each other. Keep sharing what we know. A lot of times, our young men in our communities, when they did crimes or did something that was unnecessarily or unspeakable, or something that was not approved by that was pretty much shunned on by the community, the young man or young woman, whoever it was banned from the community for a certain amount of time, and then they would go away, and the medicine man would spend time with them first and tell them, this boy, go out into the world, go venture off, come back, teach when you learn all you can, learn all you can know, and teach what you know. Learn all you have the room to know, and teach what you can. Come back after you learn these things, and your community will see that you're worthy and worthwhile, and that you learned. So that's how they were dealt with. They weren't locked up. Locking someone up only causes even more pain. Okay, someone's not allowed to forget. Once they're locked up and they got a criminal record, they're not allowed to forget. The victim is not allowed to forget. Nobody's allowed to forget. So that's what's wrong with that. The residential schools gathered up all these people, all these kids, locked them up. This is pretty much what they did. Took them to these communities far away from home and said, your moms don't want you, your dad don't want you, nobody wants you, your families don't want you. They're lying. They were lying. Okay? They're lying. Some of these families were so brokenhearted that they actually traveled hundreds of miles and camped near the residential school so they could be close to their children. So a lot of these kids were lied to, and the kids grew up to believe that they were abandoned, which helped start the fear of jealousy, the fear of abandonment. When kids came back from the residential schools, they were in fear of being abandoned by anyone that loved them, because what the residential school staff told them. And so that's how jealousy started. The sexually abusive staff were relentless. They beat the kids, made some of the boys feminized some of the boys. And I don't mean that in a bad way. but I'm just saying that this is what has happened. Um, Girls sexually abused, became promiscuous, uh, especially in addictions. Girls and boys came back to the communities, sought out abusive relationships as they got older because that's what they were used to. That's what they grew up around. They were abused all their childhood. So these are the relationship skills that they learned. Staff yelled at them. Speak English. Shut up. And so this is how we learned to talk to each other. The same way the church staff at the residential school taught. Yeah, they taught English. They taught basic skills. But those kids were there for the wrong reasons. Today they're finding mass graves still. Still finding mass graves. This is what they tried to bury. Okay, you can only bury so many bones. There were thousands, millions of Native people. Thousands upon thousands of children. Graves also. Marked, unmarked, still not even discovered. Started by the church. Residential school started by the church. This is what we worship when we go to the church, right? We worship Jesus, worship Tijognash. But all that was, all our culture was wiped away to make room for that. Okay? This is the point I'm trying to get across. At Christmas time, you want to celebrate Tjijognash's birthday? That's fine. I will celebrate it my way, and that's not celebrating at all. I don't celebrate any of the Easter or anything like that. That's not me. That's Tjijognash. Okay, that's not my culture. But that doesn't make me racist. My anger towards the churches does not make me racist. It just makes me more real. I have done a lot of learning, especially when I went to Native treatment centers to get sober and to learn about these things. I spent a lot of time with residential school survivors that shared a lot of information with me and a lot of my relatives. Many of my relatives were taken away and imprisoned from Amjinang and taken to the Mush Hole in Brantford, the residential school there. And I went back there a few years ago and camped there a couple times, and literally the kids, the spirits, are still wandering there. They'll come right up to you and touch you. If you camp there and you're sleeping there on the property, and it happened to me a couple times, and that's because it's an unrest place, right? It's an unrestly place. There's still unresolved horrors and anger that's still inside that still lurk inside the residential schools, and so this is where our ceremonies went, where our languages went, that we're struggling to get back now, and we're struggling to preserve. This is where it started. Okay, they had to do something to stop future culture. So they had to start by kidnapping the kids, taking them to these government rape schools, raping them whenever they wanted. The kids, they couldn't say anything. They could tell each other, but they couldn't say anything to the staff. The staff would not believe them or didn't want to believe them. So they had to live with that. And a lot of them kept it secret right to the grave. And that's why a lot of them began to abuse alcohol and abuse each other. because this is what was the culture that was taught. This was taking the savage out of the Indian. So this was brought back into our communities with the churches. This is why you find all these different cycles of violence here, which I will go into more specifically later as more topics arise. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and I will bring you more painting in the upcoming days. I just wanted to touch base on a couple of topics that needed to be talked about and needed to be shared. And I'd like to thank everyone. Every time that you get through one of my videos and you like my videos, and I think it's important when we're getting sober as First Nation people, as Native people, when we start learning, like I did, why we drink and why we abuse and why we abuse each other, why we abuse drugs. And this is where it started. And we need to acknowledge that and never forget that. Never forget all those little ones that are still buried. Have a good day.